The November 7th, 2019 meeting of the Palo Alto Architecture Review Board. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, good morning, board members. My name is Jody Gerhardt, Manager of Current Planning. For roll call, we have Chair Balte.
Present.
Vice Chair Thompson.
Present.
Board Member Liu.
Present.
Board Member Hirsch.
Present.
And Board Member Lee.
Present.
Thank you, all present.
Thank you. First order of business is an oral communications. If there's any members of the public who wish to speak to an item not on our agenda, not seeing and hearing no one, we'll go on. Are there any changes to the agenda, deletions? Jody? No changes. Official city reports.
Yes, so we'll see that for the next hearing, November 21st, we actually do not have any items, and so we're recommending canceling that meeting. We do have items that are in the queue for December, both of the December hearings being December 5th and December 19th. So I do want to make sure that everyone's going to be available on those dates.
December 19th,
The 5th and the 19th, yes.
I think so. I will.
I will not be here on the 19th.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Then we'll move on to our first action item, which is public hearing for 180 El Camino Real, continuation of the October 3rd, 2019 hearing for consideration of a major architectural review to allow the demolition of the existing 94,300 square foot Macy's men's building located in the Stanford Shopping Center and the construction of 1, a retail building approximately 43,500 square feet, 2 retail buildings approximately 3,500 square feet each, and 3, a retail building approximately 28,000 square feet. I understand that this is going to be continued to the next, or to some unknown date in the future, is that right?
Correct. Staff is asking to continue this to a date uncertain. We hope to bring it back fairly quickly. We just don't know exactly what date that will be.
Do you know what the status is or what they're going to be bringing back? Are they making the changes we worked out in our last meeting on that project?
Correct. So I think we agreed that the speed table was the preferred option for that one drive aisle. Related to the Wilkes-Bashford building, they are potentially bringing back a project that just shows a pad building, or not a building, a pad for the Wilkes-Bashford, so that you could just look at both the Restoration Hardware, the 2 other retail establishments, and just the parking lot area for Wilkes-Bashford. They are working on a second option that would have the entire Wilkes-Bashford building included with some updated architecture. We just weren't sure if we weren't going to meet this time frame, so maybe at a later date they will have all of it together.
Okay, great, thank you. So you're asking us just to continue this project, so I'll look for a motion to continue.
I move that we continue this to a date uncertain.
I'll second that.
Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry, I will recuse myself from this item, so I'm not
Okay.
sure if I should.
Motion carries 4 ayes, no opposed, 1 recusal. Okay, then moving on to the next item, number 2. This is a discussion of potential topics for the joint study with City Council. So we are going to be having a joint meeting with City Council to go over items of interest to them and us potentially. And the purpose of the discussion today is to try to outline what we hope to talk about and accomplish at that meeting. Later on today, myself and Vice Chair Thompson are going to be meeting with the mayor and vice mayor to try to firm up an agenda for that meeting as well. What I'd like to put to my colleagues now is that when I've never participated, but when I've watched these types of meetings in the past, they have the potential to become a sort of a rambling series of people speaking at almost cross purposes. And it's really in our interest if we can try to focus ourselves collectively to a series of ideas and issues that we feel are important and can all support together, and then make a little bit of effort to be cogent, succinct, prepared, and then present something to the council so they can get their teeth around it. We're fortunate to get a chunk of their time collectively, and we should respect that. With that, I think the way to start is to ask Amy French and Alex Liu have both some institutional memory of what past meetings like this have been about, and maybe we could ask them to just bring us up to speed what we might expect. And then I'd like to go through as a group and see if we can identify some topics and issues that we all feel are important, and ideally even break it out so one of us each might be in charge of presenting to the council one idea. So with that, Amy, why don't you tell us what you know? Thank you.
Good morning, Amy French, Chief Planning Official. You mentioned each board member having, a role in the joint meeting, and I think that seems to have been a formula that was helpful. Alex may want to weigh in on that, but I thought it was a great way for a presentation, perhaps a PowerPoint, where each board member has a role in presenting a piece of that presentation, a topic of interest to the entire board and of interest to the council. So yes, in the past, staff has attended, and they will again this year. Jody, I believe, is attending today's meeting with the mayor and vice mayor and chair and vice chair to get a feel for what council is, the mayor and vice mayor have as well to request of the ARB to come talk about. So that will be informative. And then this year, what's nice, there's a annual report that was delivered to City Council in their packet a couple weeks ago. I think it was October, maybe 2 meetings ago, 3 meetings ago perhaps, to the City Council. They received that in their packet. So whether they looked at it, so it's an opportunity to chat about that. It's an opportunity to chat about the Architectural Review Board awards that are coming up in 2020, just so they're aware of that. It's an opportunity for other potential big projects, housing projects, to be highlighted, and whatever else the board is thinking they would like to discuss with the council, if there's direction requested, focus. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thanks, Amy. Alex, you've been through these. And actually, before you started, Grace, have you in the past been through one? So maybe both of you could just tell us what you saw and heard, and what advice you might give us before we get started.
Sure. So I would say that I think I agree with you about the joint meetings. That is actually very hard to have a discussion with the two boards or a board and the city council, just because there's so many people involved. I would say one of the more, I think, in my opinion, one of the more successful joint meetings that we've had with the council is one where there was a PowerPoint presentation, and the board had discussed which board, which topic each board member would discuss. And the PowerPoint did try to address really key projects, like certain aspects of key projects. So like at one point, the council was really concerned about the entrances, like the lack of permanent entrances for buildings on El Camino. So we did use one of those projects as an example. We also used a project downtown on University Avenue as an example of how a project changed during the ARB process, for the better, and how it was more contextual. So I would think that should be, I think that's a good approach. And then I would think, too, is that since this is supposed to be like annual, I know we haven't had it for a while, but I think we should look back at the last year's projects. So, and I might suggest looking at the controversial ones if it was something where the board was unresolved. Say it's 429 University, or maybe it's the Mercedes-Benz dealer on Embarcadero Road. But if there's one where we really struggled, then let's just take it up front and just discuss what we did, what we think did well, or what we may think need to be changed or modified to make it better in the future.
Thank you, Alex. Grace, what can you add?
It was more than a few years back, and it was a different council. I do recall that there was a lack of structure, no PowerPoint, and we didn't have significant discussion about what we were going to talk about as a group. So I would say that it actually contrasted greatly from what Alex was presenting, and I think it was before, Alex, you joined the board. I did want to note that, I appreciate this effort in terms of a PowerPoint and, each with a topic, and assessing kind of ARB process in last year's projects. I do caution against opening up a large discussion on a project with minutia detail. I think that a summary in terms of something that has been discussed and is moved forward, whatever the outcome is best to treat as, a summary. The other piece that I just want to mention, and just in thinking back on how the other joint meeting went, the other piece that I hope that we can talk about today is just how our board speaks to planning issues where there's another entity, the Planning Commission, as well as staff, to speak on those planning issues. I did want to talk about just our mission and our purview as Architectural Review Board members. And if you're comfortable, maybe we can move to that later in our discussion.
That'd be great, thank you. That's a good idea. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you,
You asked if the rest of us have comments, of course.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is be structured and just right now gather as much information as we can from how past meetings have gone. So if you've been to a past Architectural Review Board City Council meeting, I'd love to hear your opinion.
No.
So if not, then what I'd like to do is, before we start discussing more, taking this letter to council we wrote as a starting point, I'm going to just list a series of the topics. And I'm hoping we can all try to focus in on a couple of these that we feel are important, with the understanding that our objective is to find items that we think we've observed things through the ARB review process that the council might be interested in. It's not stuff that we're personally feeling important about, but we're trying to convey to council information that council should know. And so that's the objective. So, and Grace, you might, I don't know if you were part of this letter we wrote, but just over the summer we put this together. And we more or less came to agreement on all these things. At the end, we finally just said we have to get it out. But the first item was trees. And we were pointing out that some construction projects with underground garages limit the size of trees. And our request was that we said these issues can be addressed in part through design review, but more explicit landscaping standards would be beneficial. I think we all agreed that it's a little bit vague sometimes. The second item we called curb management. That has to do with the increasing use of ride shares and also deliveries for businesses in town, and not having, what we said is updated standards for commercial delivery areas and more explicit standards for ride share pickup and drop-off zones would be beneficial. Again, when we're reviewing projects, that's often an issue that comes up, and there's really a lack of guidelines for applicants what to do. The third item is one that we see over and over again. It's the displacement of small businesses. That's, I think, a planning type issue, Grace, you were just alluding to. But over and over again, we see larger developments kicking out small businesses, which form the backbone of a community like ours. I don't think we had a recommendation or anything necessarily to do about it, but we're just pointing it out. I think we had in here, Alex had brought up some examples of what's being done in San Francisco. A fourth item we'd put out here was parking issues at the Stanford Shopping Center. I think we're all pretty familiar with that. Another item is pedestrian mobility. This is related to the width of sidewalks and outdoor seating areas in front of various businesses. This is something I know Winforth was passionate about. Hence benches in front of a lot of projects that have been reviewed recently. Another item was El Camino Real. Revised parking standards for developments along El Camino Real would promote the development of neighborhood retail and restaurant businesses. And then the last item was just the Architecture Review Board findings and sort of the Architecture Review Board process. So with that, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items on this list. So why don't we each just talk about a couple of these that we think are important. I think we need to pare it down. That's too many. But what's important out of all this? What do we still feel? This is now a few months after we talked about it. So, David, you want to start? Or whomever. We don't need this to be that formal.
Yeah. I think, in general, what I kind of see is that we've had some significant comments to make about landscaping. And so I'm concerned that in some sense we don't have on the board enough capability to review landscaping issues. And I would suggest that we ask that when there's a possibility of a new member on the board, that we ask the council to consider having a person of landscape ability greater than what we have on the board right now to help us in regard to reviewing these projects that involve landscaping. I know, I usually turn to Alex and ask him. He has quite a lot of knowledge about it, but I think we could use even more in some way on the board. So that was kind of a general comment I have about that. I think there's some other areas of interest that are beyond what are mentioned here. San Antonio Road now has become a new area for us, and seems to me that having looked at the hotel, this monster item coming up on San Antonio Road, that now we're dealing with other sites on San Antonio Road, and we should be questioning how that zoning will affect the look of San Antonio Road. I have a few others. Those are two of the major. I'd like to come back maybe and continue in a minute.
That's fine. Who else wants to chime in? Grace?
Osma, would you like to go because you haven't spoken?
Sure, why
I'm
not?
happy to wait.
So the items that stand out to me as important, the trees are a really big one. I think we should definitely talk about the urban canopy and how we have a lot of projects that come in front of us that make some minor apologies for, sorry, we had to get rid of this tree kind of thing. And having a bit more of a stronger attitude about what's important for our ecosystem, I think is important to stress. And then even on that vein, I think that's kind of hand in hand with a stronger attitude towards sustainability in projects. I think, California is pretty good about sustainability, but making that kind of more of something that's like part of our mission, that's something that when we're looking at a project, we should really look at that lens a bit more closely. And I think that goes kind of hand in hand with the trees. That was kind of like the major thing that started in front of me. I did, I think when we were drafting this letter, kind of very late in the game, I had like a few things to add, but it never got in there, but it was, and so I don't know if this is the right time to talk about it.
This is the right time to talk about it.
Okay. Well, so then the other item that's not on this list that I think might be worth broaching, and I'd be curious to hear my board members' opinions, is just the general aesthetics of things that we're looking at, and then kind of an evaluation of kind of maybe even last year's projects, just the similarities of things that we're seeing, and kind of how that is going to change the face of the city, and also having an attitude about the scale of things that come to us and the types of materials that come to us, and then forming an opinion on if we feel like that's good for Palo Alto in the future.
So those are such generalities, Ozma. Can you give me some examples of good and bad general aesthetics?
Yeah, I would say in general, the scale of items that we're seeing, that a lot of the times when we first see a project that we usually don't approve, it's because the scale of the design is so broad brush and large that it doesn't have a smaller human pedestrian scale. And I feel like a lot of the projects that we have been able to improve through this through this process, have been a result of pushing them to go to a smaller scale. And I think we can push even more than we have already. I think there's projects that have gone through that I think could have even benefited more from pushing down even more. So I think scale is a big item.
That's a great observation. I agree.
I'd like to add just a couple of comments. If I can remember what I just was thinking. Yeah, I've thought about how to make a presentation, PowerPoint, would be to start with a project that comes in, what it brought to us first, and then show how we've managed to modify it with some of our comments, would be an absolutely great way to do it. And the reason I'm suggesting that is, I think that we look at things visually and make our comments based on our experience that way. And I don't think the council really are those kind of people. They need to be kind of brought up to speed on how we are thinking about projects, and this would be a good way to do it. That's one. Amy, one thought is that I have some concern about how cell towers were presented, but I don't know if we want to get in the middle of that one. It's into the weeds, but it's been, kind of in our craw in a way for a while. Yours too, I have a feeling, and it's been tough. But so you want to stay away from that one, right?
Yes, I would suggest that there's such, since I'm jumping in, one thing that will be coming to the ARB, we are, because of state legislation that is advocating affordable housing projects and looking at objective standards, we're looking at objective standards for the cell towers, but not as interested in that as I am in the housing objective standards, because we are going to be looking at our ARB findings, the context-based findings, and seeing if there are ways to have more objective standards for affordable housing projects. So this is, if you're thinking about projects to talk about and how your influence, improve the projects, we might want to think about a project that includes multifamily housing and start thinking about how our aesthetics are quantified somehow, in the findings or in the context-based design criteria, and because that's going to be a big topic coming up, is how we can get more objective.
Another one as part of that would be, what is it called, the small dwellings? ADUs, to actually see a sample or example of how an ADU has actually worked in this community here. I'm just curious, because it's so talked about in the entire state now, What have we done?
Yeah, so it's a little off topic just because ARB doesn't look at the ADUs, certainly, and they're ministerial, so we don't have a discretionary review aspect of those at all.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I would just say that's a topic for another day that we could talk about, but probably not good for this meeting with the Joint Council, just because there's so much else that the ARB is involved in reviewing.
So I want to remind us all that our goal is to find things that we think the council needs to hear from us. And
so why wouldn't something like the impact of an ADU on a residential area be important?
well, we don't have any explicit experience through the ARB doing that, none whatsoever. And so that's where I think we want to be careful. It's not my opinion as a practicing architect. I've designed many ADUs and have strong opinions about it. Mm-hmm. But I want to be careful that we're here as a board, taking city council's time as a council to communicate to them things that we, I think, really have observed and can make strong statements about collectively. I think the cell tower ship has sailed, David, unfortunately. the council heard everybody's opinion in multitudes on that. Alex, what are you thinking?
Okay, so I think I do think the tree issue is important, and I think I would enlarge that topic to encompass, how do I want to say this? Like, I might incorporate that into like we have like a parking issue. I might sort of enlarge it, so it's not just about trees, because it's related to.
It's all related, yeah.
Yeah, they're all tied together. It's not just a tree. It's the issue of bigger scale urban buildings, and how does the city grow to the next larger scale, but still keep true to its roots. I think I support David's comment about San Antonio Road and the development happening there, although I'm thinking that maybe we push that back a year until maybe after the hotel's finished, so that there's something to react against. I think it's important because San Antonio Road has the CS zoning, but it doesn't have we don't have any like El Camino design guidelines for that street. So, and there's no, at least on the side facing, I think on Mountain View, there's no, they typically don't have residential behind there. So there potentially can be very large buildings on one side of the street on San Antonio Road. So I think that is a concern. I have another comment on the pedestrian mobility is that I think that we should incorporate in there that like the number of percentage of the population that's going to be over 65 is going to grow by 40%, and so it's basically the baby boomers are going to be retiring, and I think that's a huge issue. And I think that was part of Wynn's thinking in adding this. So I think I might enlarge it more like just like aging in place. And how does the city adapt to that? So it's not just about benches. And I find that with my own parents, and they're used to living in the town, and now they're realizing that they have to sort of change their lifestyle for their age, and they're not finding that the city's working that well for them. So I think that's kind of an interesting topic. I don't know if we bring that up with the council. I don't know what comes of it. But I think that's sort of on the radar. If you think about like the road diet that we did on Charleston and Rostradero, I mean that was sort of with an eye towards that, with all of the bulb outs and crosswalks. And then I had a comment on we have the El Camino issue. And I think you say in there, the last line is revised parking standards for development on El Camino would promote development of neighborhood, retail, and restaurant businesses. And I do support that comment. And I think the staff has tried to address that. We do have an exclusion, a new exclusion, right, of the first 1,500 square feet of ground floor retail doesn't have to be parked. And that's new. It's a footnote. I think maybe we could highlight that that's in there. We don't really have any projects that have used it yet. I think we have the one on San Antonio Road is thinking about, is going to try to use it, even though they're not on San Antonio Road. I mean, they're not on El Camino. But I think in that one, we could probably mention that like many of the restaurants that people frequent, like they don't have enough parking. They're grandfathered in, so nothing's going to, there's no incentive to improve your property, right? If you're already deficient on parking, you're grandfathered in, right? And you don't touch the parking lot because then you'd have to bring it up to code. So it's kind of it's a really difficult situation where we've got things that don't look good.
Well, we kind of have 1950s suburban parking requirements for a growing city.
Yep,
Sooner or later, that conflicts.
yep.
And what we observe, you're right, is when a restaurant comes in or a building with a restaurant on the ground floor, parking drives everything. They can't actually meet the parking to make the restaurant fit. Costs go sky high to make it work with subterranean elevator lift parking spots, and it's not really in the city's best interest. And that's precisely, I think, the kind of thing council should be hearing from us, is the nuts and bolts of why and how that code requirement impacts the inability to create things that we all want to see in the town. That's a good point, Alex.
Yeah, and then if we say that we really want to hold on to the parking standards, then you have to sort of accept that there might be other use, there have to be we have to allow other uses, whatever it is, the exercise place. There are other things, because retail is sort of declining. I think there's a huge demand for exercise places. So it's a tricky one, and I think the difference is on like El Camino is that the parking standards are specific to the use, whereas like downtown or the shopping center, it's all blended. Yeah, so I think that one's more complicated. That one's like really complicated. Like I think it's kind of hard to have a discussion on that because as you guys know, the zoning on El Camino is very site-specific, so.
Is there any support on the board for the concept that parking standards as a whole are driving a lot of development in the town and perhaps really need all to be revised?
May I just make a few comments that relate to
please do,
what you,
please do.
and I'm sorry, I feel like I'm the new person, and I am the new person, but I'm also the old person. So I did want to make some comments that might not sit well, and it's because I'm joining the board so late, and I haven't been a part of your process in the past year, and I want to thank you so much for all the work that has been completed, and I'm not knowledgeable on the projects, all the details. That's why I have some hesitation in being a part of going through specific projects, and I think there's a challenge in that for myself, and I'm happy to kind of sit back if you all would like to do that. I see the ARB as really, I feel more comfortable talking about all of these things when we begin to structure in terms of our role in context-based and contextual design, high-quality materials that age properly and sit well in that context, scale, and the need for recognition of landscape as something that often speaks to scale. Looking at different cities in terms of learning from those precedents and examples of what may occur in a similar size growing place. I feel less comfortable in terms of talking, because there may be disagreement in terms of aesthetics on our board. Color is very subjective, aesthetics is very subjective. I also think about these applications that come in as individual applications, and I'm wary of the board pushing an applicant to a certain spot, or using that word. I'm also not comfortable with critiquing, parking standards are totally, completely involved in the design, but I am wary of being a planner, and I have a planning background. I have worked on urban design projects in my professional life, and I see the connection, but we have a planning commission, we have city councilors, and we have an excellent staff, and I feel like our purview is to review applications that come in each separately, and so when we make these larger comments about displacement of small businesses, even the comments regarding zoning, land use planning, and designations of zoning on El Camino Real. These TDMs are really important. I feel like that's, again, not our purview still. I feel like that's the staff, and they work with the applicant in that way. And maybe I've just not been on the board for the past 10 years, but I'm wary of me as an applicant, as an architectural designer, going to a city where there is large changes that are occurring and being suggested that are not architectural design based. That has occurred. I've been on the other side, and it does create discomfort, and I'm not sure that's our purview.
I agree with you, Grace. I think all of us feel that we want to be very careful not to try to become planners or the staff reviewing projects, and we don't want to be, for example, requiring more parking than the code requires, or saying you can't exceed or go to an FAR standard.
And I'm
things
sure
like
this
that.
board is not doing that. My feeling is, and sorry, not to jump in, but Peter, I feel most comfortable with G. In terms of the findings that I saw that you have revised since 2017, I feel very comfortable with, A, B, and E as it relates to the public realm in terms of evaluating applications. Not as comfortable with C, D, and E, and F as they are written. However, I believe, there should be a general discussion too with council on all of the issues that come up through these projects. And if it works best, perhaps I can listen in terms of how the board is presenting on work that they have reviewed that, I did not weigh in on.
So let me try to sway your thinking a little bit, because we've evolved, I think, since I've been on the board at least, to, I think, realizing that there are trends that seem to be showing up over and over again in projects meeting current codes and planning conditions. And what I think we've come to think is that we're the ones, so to speak, in the trenches, observing the reality of what happens when a building is designed to meet these standards. And my understanding, talking to architects and citizens, applicants, and council members, is that they don't really see the ramification of some of these things. And what I think we're advocating for is not how to change the code, but rather to say that some of these things are issues. So what we've observed, a clear one, is when you have underground parking, which we all think is good, the code encourages, it makes it very difficult to have above ground large trees on the perimeter of a property. You have this big concrete vault underneath. And that's a conflict we're seeing that hasn't been really well thought through. And I think if I were a policymaker, I would appreciate getting that feedback. And that's what I think we're trying to do here, is be specific in the feedback we give, ideally relative to projects that have gone through our process. But I think we are trying to say that there are policy issues, code issues that can be addressed. We've observed that a lot of these projects chase out small businesses, and I don't know that, I guess that one is seen by everybody in the political process when there's a string of small businesses upset about something. But to see it the way we do, the way the design chases it out, when they're forced to build, when the story heights of a building are lower, it makes the spaces a little bit less attractive to large commercial clients and more to small businesses still. That's a subtle, nuanced design thing that council may want to hear.
Well, I agree. I think that, if perhaps the way to frame it is, here are challenges that, there's interlinking parts, and here are some challenges. I go to what Amy just suggested in terms of talking about objective standards and projects that involve multifamily housing or larger scale developments. And for those specific uses, I struggle because, it is there are issues in terms of land use and planning and small businesses, for example, and small scale buildings within a context and development that's going to occur later. So it opens a can of worms when we do this, and maybe the way to frame it is just as you're saying, that here are some trends and challenges that we've seen this past year.
Yeah, we want to put the worms in a can so they're not all over the place, but I think they're there and we have to face up to that, using that metaphor. Does anybody else have other thoughts about, we're trying to narrow down a list of things that we can discuss, and after that I want to see if we can get individuals to agree to be behind one of these, hopefully.
Yeah, I want to respond to your comment about aesthetics being subjective. I feel like maybe there might be a way to reframe what I mean when I'm wanting to talk about this issue, because it's true, it's kind of dangerous to talk about taste. Like, we're not really talking about architecture taste at all, because you're right, that is subjective. But I think there are some basic, and maybe aesthetic is the wrong word for this, so I'd be curious to see if you could help me try to drive at what I'm trying to get at. But oftentimes we'll see, like, the first iteration of a project will be very blocky and boxy. And that, I have no other way to describe that is just aesthetically unattractive and not what we want the future of Palo Alto to be. Something that has no scale, that feels very massive and overbearing in the city. And so if aesthetic is not the right word, I'm not sure what is, but I think I do think we need to talk about scale in architecture as it relates to just improving the environment. Because I think those projects that do come in front of us that don't have a regard, at least the initial stages don't have a regard for that scale, there has to be something in our toolhouse where we can say, like, this is not acceptable for Palo Alto. And context alone, I don't know if is enough.
I totally appreciate it, thank you. I think scale and massing and context are interlinked, and aesthetics, if the board feels is important to retain, is a little bit more of a subjective term in my mind, but I completely understand what you're discussing.
So let's take that topic, Ozma. How do we phrase that to the council? What are we actually trying to tell them they should be aware of? Scale and design aesthetics are important. I'm having a tough time understanding what we're actually trying to say as an example. Do you want to take a particular building and, like, as David mentioned, we can show how a design evolves. Generally, as you're saying, it breaks down in finer, higher quality design details and scale and massing and stuff. But I guess what I'm concerned about is that's kind of telling them something they already know in a way, that we work hard to get buildings better. Mm-hmm. What's the takeaway from them as far as what they should do or how they should react to it?
So there are projects that have passed our review, and obviously I don't know the whole history of them, but there are projects that, when they can't get through us, they go to council because they can't get through us because aesthetically we can't approve them, and then council goes ahead and approves them, and that's partially why I bring this up. And it's not entirely why. Like there's also just a good discussion to have about what the future face of Palo Alto is going to look at. I do think, so should we bring up individual projects that we're thinking of talking about?
Absolutely. I think the more we can be concrete and visual, the stronger our presentations will be.
So there was a affordable housing project that came in front of us. I remember forgetting the name actually, but it was
Wilson Court.
It came twice, right? They had like a prelim where we were just giving feedback, and then they had a first quasi that we passed on, that we approved them. And I think their improvement from what they showed us in the prelim and to what we ended up approving is a good example of something that, had some aesthetic flaws, let's say, or some things that could be improved on, that they took our feedback and what we ended up approving was better.
So you're talking about, I think it's Wilton Court. It was down in South Palo Alto on El Camino.
Sure, yes.
Fairly large.
I think so.
Boxy building, and they made substantial improvements on the design.
Yeah, I think we've only had 2 affordable housing projects this year.
The only other one would be the VTA property that was workforce housing.
So take that project as an example. The council was overly enthusiastic, or not overly, but highly enthusiastic to get that approved and pushed through. It was a great project for many, many reasons above and beyond the architecture. We felt the architecture was good as well. What's the takeaway from council? What are we trying to tell them about that project? That we made it better?
Just that it coming ahead of time, just coming before the quasi-judicial, I think helped it pass a lot. Because if it had come in the state that it was when we saw it in prelim, if that had been the quasi-judicial hearing, I don't know that all of us would have been as enthusiastic.
So the informal review process was invaluable.
I think so.
I think we can all get behind
I think
that.
since, we're looking at maybe not being able to have discretionary review for affordable housing projects, I think that we should really look at what the board did, what the findings, what were the findings, and that I think we maybe should make a recommendation or make a suggestion that, if we don't have discretionary review for these projects, what should be added in our findings or codes or findings or design guidelines?
I think that's great, Alex.
Yeah,
That's
because,
brilliant.
because the reality is that even if we don't have discretionary review for affordable housing projects, they still may have to follow a guideline or try to follow a guideline. So I think that it should be something like, if there's something missing in the El Camino design guidelines or whatever guideline, downtown guidelines, that we think that should be in there in the event that the board isn't reviewing those projects in the future, that the city is comfortable with that the city is comfortable with doing that.
So a takeaway to the council maybe then, along the lines of what you were saying, Ozma, in the event that we're talking about affordable housing projects where our discretionary review may not exist in the future, demonstrating to them the benefit that our discretionary review offered, and maybe the need to be cognizant of that when crafting objective standards in the future is really important. So we could demonstrate to them that this review process made a huge difference on the building, and that they really need to have something in place if we want to keep that standard up. So that,
I'm so sorry, isn't there already something in place, though?
So we will be visiting with the ARB soon. Staff is in, weekly meetings, basically. We have a consultant. December 5th, we're going to be talking about this topic. It's just going to be after the joint meeting with the council. But your awareness that this is a topic is a good one to acknowledge in your meeting with the council, that you're looking forward to being part of that process.
so by bringing it up, we're just asking the council for further support behind this process. We maybe even should say that the ARB should be appointing a subcommittee to be integrating with staff as you guys are starting to develop these policies, and two of us could be at the table with you doing that. It's independent of what we're here for directly, but I think Ozma is bringing up some good points about the scale and the detail of design that we want to bring up. And do we all agree that it doesn't hurt to bring that to council's attention?
Yeah.
You do, Ozma. And what do we all think about that? If we say that's one of our topics, is this affordable housing design standards?
May I understand a little bit better in terms of what process there is in terms of design review currently?
So, all projects are subject to architectural review, discretionary review over a certain number of 5,000 square feet, but then there's also the units. So we have, there's a site and design review process that's been on the books, and that's over 9 units now, something. We've increased the numbers.
We've increased the number for site and design.
For site and design.
3 units will come to ARB.
Yeah, 3 units comes to ARB. Site and design, which then involves the Planning Commission and Council, is when it's over 9 units. So, but for affordable housing, I think that's going to be changing as well. Yeah, we have a lot of affordable housing projects in the wings, actually, very recently. There's been an influx of money from private companies and all of this, so it's kind of exciting. I got lost in answering your question, but basically, we do have requirements for design review over 3 units that goes to the ARB currently.
So I'm just confused. Are we, since there already is a design review in place for these projects, and preliminary is often encouraged, what exactly are we?
Our concern is that the design review may be going away. The state laws are now coming down where we don't have the option of getting discretionary design review on projects.
It's basically for discussion on December 5th, how we might address, the city might address this.
Yeah, so that will be the first opportunity for the ARB to, be involved in those conversations. And there's probably an opportunity, I think it's a good idea always to have a subcommittee of
Now I understand.
members. Yeah.
Thanks.
I think provided we keep this focused on the subject of affordable housing, we can make a very strong statement about design review being important. And if there is no discretionary design review, the city should be sure to supply something else, which would be some set of standards. And getting council aware of that is a good thing. It's the kind of thing they wouldn't ordinarily know about directly. They're not experienced in this. Does that sync with you, Grace? I can't tell.
I'm just thinking about it, and I'm wondering if there's the subcommittee might be the way to accomplish that kind of design review.
I think it's right. It would be a subcommittee. It would be great interfacing with staff as they develop these standards. But do you think it's a good thing to bring to attention of the council?
Well, I think you're right in pointing out that it's a trend that the state regulations now are sort of over our heads, they're looking like they're pushing so hard that they're pushing us right out. I feel that pretty strongly as well. It also involves kind of general planning, where's all this housing going to really happen, in this city here. And it seems to me that there should be some similar thought coming from planning and transportation about where all this will be happening. So in some way, I think we ought to be coordinating with planning and transportation because our aesthetic is important to these aspects of change.
Absolutely. To Grace's point, however, we want to not be the planning commission here. And so if we just focus on the aesthetic issues that Ozma's pointing out, that's what we're observing, and there's a strong need to have some standards for how these buildings are being built. I think that's a legitimate point to make to council, but I'm asking if everybody also shares that opinion. Is this a good thing to bring up to council's attention? Deafening silence here.
Looking for a vote? Yes.
No, I'm not looking for a vote. This is just, do we all agree? What I don't want to do is get in front of council and then have two of us speak up saying the opposite, and then they get nothing. Better to all agree now what we do agree on and strongly say something. So if we don't have a majority in favor of that idea, we should put it on the table, off the table. But as I understand it, the idea is that we want to bring to them as one topic would be affordable housing design standards and the importance of having something, be it objective or subjective. Can we all get behind that idea?
Yes.
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 I would agree. The reason why I'm cautious is because just having worked on affordable housing, there's significant hoops for those groups in terms of how they receive review, and I just don't want to give the impression that we are going to add a hefty review process in addition to all those hoops. Perhaps we could talk about some kind of liaison with staff to be a part of that process.
Absolutely. Those are very strongly taken points. Okay, let's try to pick another one that's easy here. So we have the issue of the trees, and I think I hear a consensus that just continuing protection of trees and perhaps more explicit design standards regarding trees and parking, and perhaps, I don't know how you would do this, David, but clearly the board benefits from having an experienced landscape architect or capable person up here. I'm not sure that we can say much about that except just to point out the importance of it. Is there any consensus behind that vague set of ideas? Alex, can you maybe phrase that better? What would our topic really be?
Yeah. Just to follow up on David's point, I don't think we've ever had a landscape architect apply to the board. I've debated about that several times when we have recruiting projects, or recruitments. And then I think the other thing too is that we have a whole urban forestry division. We have Peter Jensen, right? So we have resources. You don't have to rely solely on your, on your knowledge or lack of. And I really don't have that much knowledge about landscape. I think that the issue with this, I think trees and stuff, I think is really very difficult to grasp unless you're really, really looking at a plan or example. But I think it's really very, I think it's very specific. I think it's going to be, it may be difficult to talk about it generally. I could say, I know when the basements are extending under all of the buildings, when I see a tree in a pot, and I start looking around and I realize this entire thing that I'm walking on is all concrete. And so I know I hear comments from people in the public saying, oh, I don't like that project, but they can't really explain it. But then when I go like digging around, I sort of figure out why they don't like it. But I think this is something really difficult to discuss unless we have unless we have an example or examples or photos of that. But I think that's like our new reality, right? We've got these new hotels. They really only have shrubs around the perimeter. There are no trees. I think that we're going to face that pretty soon, like when those buildings are built.
Same question as to Ozma. What's the council's takeaway from those comments that trees are impacted by underground parking?
Yeah.
So what? What are they supposed to do about it?
That's not okay.
Well, so this came up with houses, and we don't allow basements to extend beyond the footprint of the house above ground. There are some exceptions, but...
No, even under our front porch, they won't let us do that now.
Yeah. But basically, yeah, so I don't know. It seems to me an issue. I think it's kind of difficult. It's a tricky one to discuss with the council, I would think.
Okay, so I agree, it's a difficult issue. It's tricky to explain. I think that could be done. I think Ozma's jumping to say that it's really important, which I think we all agree as well. But David and Grace, what's your opinion about this tree question?
I just see the word trees, and it seems to me that landscape is much grander than just trees. Ozma, you're doing some landscaping kind of things when you do urban improvements to transportation, These things happen. Streets and trees, are all kind of interconnected in some way. There are trees and streets, I just think the topic of trees by itself is too minimal a description. It's really, the landscaping involves so many other aspects. Having kind of worked on urban street improvements, that has to do with trees as well.
So for me, this is not about streets. This is really about having a 50-foot building. Maybe it's only like 10 feet away from the property line, right? So it's very close to the neighbors, and there are no trees. That's what we have now in our current projects. Mm-hmm. We don't have any landscape we have. If you put a parking lot in, you have to put in perimeter landscaping. Mm-hmm. But if you have a basement that goes to the property line, or say like 5 feet to the property line, you don't have to do anything. There really isn't a standard in many of our zones because, and especially in the CS zone, because we have 0 setback. And so I think that's the issue. If you mentioned the San Antonio hotel project, so that's one of them. There are no trees on the sides of the property. We just have shrubs and things in pots.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's because that basement goes right to the property.
The garage extends.
It's maybe 3 feet or something.
So maybe it's like 5 feet, and then I guess it's parking because they're trying to fit in all the parking so that they can maximize the floor area as they're allowed to. And I think that one they did come in with like a parking reduction later. Yeah, so it's not about trees, it's about trees and parking and underground parking and floor area. Okay. And it's really just how does the city grow?
Okay, trees and parking. Grace, what's your opinion?
I think trees are important. I think landscape is important. I read here these issues, more explicit landscaping standards would be beneficial. Is that something that we are requesting, that there would be more explicit landscaping standards that the city would?
I think Alex has phrased it a lot better than
because
that.
I think
that statement seems a little bit vague.
Yes, and I'm not sure that's what we're requesting as a group. The ARB may weigh in on requests for more landscaping, right? That's something that we can weigh in on. And I wonder if you did want to highlight some of the terrific examples where you did weigh in and there was a positive outcome. I think the joint meeting is a terrific opportunity to showcase a few projects where there are challenges the city is facing, and here are some examples where the project that was approved was improved for the benefit of all regarding to scale, context, and massing. I understand that approach might be helpful for council to see and maybe bring up those challenges.
You're absolutely right. I think some of us are feeling that it hasn't always been successful, and we've had our hands tied by code and applicants who insist on the parking out to the property line, and then we're forced to accept less landscaping and less trees at the perimeter than we know are necessary, but we have.
Absolutely, and I guess my feeling is, sometimes a reduction of surface parking, is a positive change, and sometimes a parking garage where non-mature trees need to go away that has to be weighed by the applicant and the city and ourselves, right? So I guess I caution against these sentences that sound like the council might take away as, well, we just need to keep more surface parking with this kind of tree request. And since it's such a short period of time, I wonder if you could provide examples of projects where there was a positive recommendation and it worked out well.
Osma, what do you think?
Oh, I have too many strong opinions.
That's good. No, this is the time to have them.
So it's true. Obviously it depends on the project, depends on the tree. If the tree is unwell, of course, totally makes sense not to, fight for something that's already, on its way out, say, for example. But we have I feel like we have projects that have very healthy trees, and it's just inconvenient. It seems like applicants, the property line is like their hard, we obviously can't go past the property line, but like these beautiful trees that are like extremely robust and healthy, we can get rid of them because they're not as important as that property line. And I think that attitude is a problem, because I think our urban canopy should be a priority, and I think there should be something to say to the city council that it should be their priority as well, because it's true, our hands are tied in a lot of ways. We have applicants that are like, we want all these things, and the sacrifice is trees, and we have nothing in our wheelhouse to say that's, we've tried, I think with our last review where we were saying, okay, well, never mind, but there's still, I don't know, it's about priorities. We have a list of findings that explain our priorities, and at the moment, our priorities are summarized in landscaping, right?
So when we revised the findings, I made sure that we kept a provision in there about existing, I think it was like existing resources, so like an existing tree. It's in the findings, so we can use it. I'm just saying, we have to use the findings when we don't have an explicit landscape standard. And so then I guess it sort of begs the question then, is like, well, it goes back to this, like, why don't we have a landscape, what is our landscape standard? And where is it deficient?
Mm-hmm. And to be fair, you're right, we have an urban forestry division. I think maybe the goal is really just to explain to the council that these are trends that we're seeing. And so not necessarily that, we have to reinvent anything. It's just alerting them to this is what's coming up our way.
Is it fair, Grace, to paraphrase what you're saying by saying that the standards already exist, our job is to enforce them, and we've been doing that, and we don't need to change the standards as much as we need to be firm in enforcement? Or as projects go through, if we want to save these trees, we have the authority to do that, we should be doing it?
I'm sorry. So I guess I go back to what Alex said in terms of the findings which we have improved is the direction that we go in terms of making those findings, and we have able-bodied staff who specialists who guide us, and so in my mind it would be good to point out the trends and point out some successful projects. Maybe that would illustrate that the trees and the public realm, the curb management as it relates, to parking, is very important to us, and we see this in many projects that come our way.
Also, I think, Uzma, it seems to me when we look at project, in our project packets, that sometimes applications will include the tree removal and the arborist report, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
And so it may be that we ask staff to include that in every project. I think we had a member of the public who's also interested in the in the tree issue. So we can make that recommendation as well. If we want really more discussion and review of the tree removal.
I want to point out that on the Wilkes-Bashford, we ran into that.
David, please don't discuss projects currently being reviewed.
Okay. On a recent project, we had that issue and decided that actually, even though it was a recommendation that we consider a tree removal, that we ourselves decided it would be better to try to retain the tree. So I think that it's a significant project issue that we address it in that manner when it is part of our standards to do so, even if the staff recommendation is different.
Can I jump in for just a second? I just want to make sure that we remember what we're aiming towards is an hour-long meeting with council with 12, 7 council members and 5 of you, and it's going to be there's going to be a desire for feel-good moments with pictures and what's working well will be part of that. I think we'll want to feel that connection over with the council. To go down a road of touching base with them and asking them to weigh in and confirm concerns, that should have council direct staff. I mean, we definitely won't have the kind of time during that hour to have that happen. Just kind of calling that out. So I wouldn't expect this to result in council direct staff to go work on X, do code changes or whatever. Just wanted to bring that up, make sure we're not thinking that's going to be part of that meeting.
Well, I'm hearing that the issue of trees and parking is complex, and perhaps we already have what we need from council on those issues. We need to focus on it a little bit harder, maybe, if it's something we're concerned about. I see Grace nodding her head with that statement. Is everybody else sort of taking it off the table? Are we resigned to that? Amy's point is well taken. If we spend 20 minutes discussing about trees like we just did, we've gotten nowhere.
Yeah, I like the way Grace put it before, that we could address it through an example rather quickly and save a lot of time on it.
Let's jump then to something else. We were talking about design standards on San Antonio Road, or the need thereof, and perhaps relating that even to design standards along El Camino. Is there any way we can give them a clear sense of something about that? I know we feel that way on buildings on San Antonio. There's a contextual requirement, and we can't figure out what the context is. I think we could use some guidance on that myself. But who else wants to say something?
Maybe that's not appropriate for the council at this time. Maybe we should discuss that at a retreat and then let staff discuss it and then maybe bring it to the council next time. Like, I'm not sure it's ready for prime time, right?
Okay,
I think
Alex,
we should discuss it internally, and then bring it to the council.
I'd be fine with that.
Yes, but you could bring it up to the joint meeting as an issue that we're concerned about.
Yeah, I think ideally, I think I would put it in maybe put it in the letter as an issue, but not necessarily for the actual meeting.
Are we agreed then? Perhaps hold off on.
I was just going to suggest that, it'd be terrific to see it written that they could read. Is there a way to talk about, not in terms of published design standards or a process, but we see projects that benefit from some kind of collective thinking from a diverse group of stakeholders. The city is growing. There are significant challenges ahead in many different areas in terms of uses. And along San Antonio and El Camino Real, we would support working with council on how to collaborate on this effort in terms of some kind of guidelines that might benefit the city. I mean, is that general enough? I feel like a lot of what's written in your letter here, all of these things relate to San Antonio and El Camino Real. I know in my interview with the council, I brought up our main boulevards and growth of the city, and I feel like that's a lot of what we're going to be reviewing in the future. So I don't know, I feel like maybe that is something to say.
The question, I think, is whether we do it now or we wait till that hotel is finished, and then it'll be glaringly obvious, I think.
Okay, yes, if you have a project in progress that you're weighing in on, I understand why you might want to wait.
Yeah, I think I agree with Alex's concept that maybe this needs a little more time to gestate.
I just had a thought of, so in terms of the plan of how we're going to formulate this PowerPoint, assuming that that's going to be what we do this time, presumably there will be slides that don't require much dwelling on, like it could just be like hey, we talked about this, but obviously we're not going to go in depth. And so maybe we could have some of these smaller, I say smaller, I just mean, other topics that potentially aren't ready for prime time, that could just be kind of in one of those, like, these are our observations, we're seeing this, and then, sorry, just going back to the structure of the PowerPoint, that we could be like, and here's an example of a project that went through, and that could like allow us to end on something that shows them our value, and also talk about the things that we've seen that are trends that we don't necessarily need to fix right now, but just that we're seeing them, and we can, look forward to seeing them later as well, since we obviously are not trying to fix them right now.
So we could just point this out as an upcoming trend. I think we all agree this is an upcoming thing, and maybe not get into the depths of it.
Yeah, similar with the tree issue, I would say.
So let's try to go through a few more of these. What I'd like to do, actually, big picture, is to see if we can identify no more than 5 topics. Then I'd like to take a break, also then if we can adjust the agenda, let these folks have their subcommittee hearings so they don't have to spend all morning here. And then we can reconvene and finish who's going to tackle what and how we're going to do it. Are we all agreed on that?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
So the next item I think we should discuss is this concept of curb management. And it's something I feel strongly about, that I think it would be really great to have more explicit standards. Over and over again, we see projects that don't address these issues, and as they're built, you can see it just not functioning very well. Take the Epiphany Hotel downtown. It's a constant block up in front of this Hamilton Avenue at certain hours. It's just not passable. There's just too many people stopping there. It's because we don't have a standard of how that works. Really, again, it's parking. We have parking all along the curbside, and we shouldn't have that. But I think council really needs to hear from us. We're the ones who observe it as they go through the design process. Do I have any other ideas on that?
I thought it was encouraging to see this example of, an example in other cities that we may point to as kind of a learning opportunity.
Anybody else have can we put that one on our list of things? What do we think about it? Alex?
Well, it seems to me this is one that's really the transportation division and the PTC. And I think that we put it on here because it's an issue, right? It's not necessarily our issue.
Well, we need to be careful not to suggest a solution, but we're pointing out a problem.
Right, I'm fine with pointing something out. And just leaving it at that.
Absolutely, I agree. We're not out to tell how to do something. We just see an issue. Does everybody else agree that this is an issue and this is warranted to bring to the attention of council? David?
Just the way it's stated, commercial delivery, more explicit standards for ride, sharing, pickup, drop-off zones. Yes, I agree.
Do you recollect that building down on, was it Cambridge Avenue, down in California Avenue District? It was a fairly large commercial building, and the code required them to have something of a 40-foot drop-off space, which just wasn't physically feasible in the building. So the result is they had nothing. And we really didn't have any way to get them to make a smaller scale drop-off that really would serve that building. If I remember right, it was just a,
You know, the planning code has changed with regard to the loading zone. So I think we fixed that.
okay, so maybe it's been fixed for loading, but I still think it's an important thing that we can point out examples to and put out there. Let's see, I think I see 2 more topics here that we might be able to agree on. So one of them, which is dear to my heart again, is the parking situation at the Stanford Shopping Center. I will acknowledge that very strongly veers away from the Architecture Review Board provenance. But I would point out that what we're observing is many restaurants going in there that are using a higher parking count, and therefore the parking and demands aren't being met, and other restaurants in town have a different parking standard, and it just creates an inequity that is bothersome, at least to me. But I agree that perhaps this is not an ARB issue, but I want to hear what everybody else thinks.
Yeah, so it's really, to me, it's a thorny issue because there's a cap, and they've been juggling around square footages and decreasing parking. So it's a tricky one, but they're still within their cap and they're within the zoning code. So it seems to me we've had projects, there have been proposals in the past where they're proposing to change to the cap. You know, there was one at one point, you know, they were proposing a hotel on the site. It seems to me, I guess the way I'm thinking about it is that you modify the parking the next time they try to do a big project. Because right now they're sort of working within the existing restrictions, and it seems to me that they're allowed to do that under, you know, if you're reading a narrow interpretation of the code,
So
they're allowed to do it.
let me try to make the same argument Grace was making with the trees then. It comes down to an issue of us enforcing strongly what we see. They are within the count at the shopping center. However, it's really not functional. There's just way too many dead-end parking aisles. There's way too much demand on one end of the shopping center, and much of that count is a quarter of a mile away on the second floor of the garage on the other side of the shopping center. I've been making the argument that it's not a functional requirement, which is finding number 4. I think if we don't want to enforce it strongly through our findings in our hearing, then it's legitimate to tell the council that we need a stronger or change in the code. What I'm arguing is that we should at least point out to council that this issue exists. I don't think they or anybody in the public sees it. All everyone sees is that it's hard to find a parking place at the shopping center on Saturday. And why is that? It's because there's an influx of personal use type businesses, restaurants, which have higher demand, and a decrease in parking.
I'll just say that, you know, Peter, we saw this in Town and Country when Trader Joe's came in. This does come up to the board, and then, you know, at the same time, I'm comfortable just recusing myself from talking about Stanford as an employer. But I think if all of you feel strongly, as Peter does, I understand that it's a trend that you're seeing. I don't know.
I think I might be the only one who feels strongly about it.
Okay.
That's why I keep bringing this up.
Peter, I think that the trouble I have with making a big issue is that, like, I think most people understand that if you try to go to any shopping center on a Saturday afternoon, it's going to be crazy. It's if you go to Santana Row or Valley Fair or wherever, it's like that. And personally, I don't go on those days. Or if I do go to the shopping center on a Saturday afternoon, I know exactly where I'm going to park. I know exactly where in the garage I'm going to park, and I have no issues finding a space because I know where the spaces are. And I don't try to go to the spots where you're trying to go, right next to the restaurant. But it goes to the issue is peak. You're trying to argue for like peak parking, as I understand it. Am I not? You're trying to have a convenient spot right next to the restaurant at the peak time, and I don't think that this seems like everything that I read in planning is not to do that. That's actually the wrong approach to parking.
I guess what really gets my goat on this all is that it just seems to really go against building other downtowns in the area, because we're giving the shopping center this big incentive to put restaurants in the shopping center, and then restaurants on Cal
But we have the
Avenue.
same. It's the same issue with downtown. We have the blended parking downtown as well.
But the parking ratios are such that it's easier for it to fit in at Stanford Shopping Center. That's why you see so many restaurants going in there in part. It's very hard to put a new restaurant anywhere else because of the parking requirement. That's where parking is required. Think of a Protégé restaurant on California Avenue and the trouble they had to go through to create parking just to be allowed to open up. Because it was a new building, they had to meet parking requirements, and they have these elevator lifts in the back. And the owner was telling me there are hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of car lifts that nobody uses to meet the code. If they put that restaurant in a shopping center, they would have no issue. This wouldn't be the money would be saved. And that's what I'm really driving towards. And that's what's not really an architecture board issue, but it's something I feel strongly
I just want to mention that whenever you add parking to an agenda and to an hour-long meeting with 12 people, it will dominate, and so maybe we can just be very kind of strategic in how we talk about parking or introduce that subject.
I will say, my 2 cents, I sort of feel closer to how Board Member Liu feels about this parking issue. I'm definitely not, I don't feel as strongly about the issue at Stanford Shopping Center, also mainly because I also don't go there on peak hours, and I usually bike there. But it's kind of, it's definitely not in our purview, and if I would be open to mentioning it briefly, but I wouldn't want to make that a focal part of our conversation.
Yeah, pretty much the same feeling about it. It's true of all shopping centers that they're very crowded at certain times. It's kind of nice, the fact that Stanford Shopping Center has restaurants in it, and they can last after hours when parking is less common there. And so it's not a bad location to have some major restaurants the way it seems to be working. And there are ways to solve the parking that Stanford could utilize, to increase the size of the garages. And they're also implementing present programs to get staff and people who work there to park in the garages. So while I agree it's an issue, it's a significant issue, I think we shouldn't emphasize it too much in this discussion with the council.
Okay, I think that's all fair, that we should just take parking out of the subject for now. It's correct that it will dominate the entire meeting if we bring it up, so best, it's in our letter, we'll leave it at that. The last thing that I think we do have to discuss, and if I'm only quickly, is to item G here, basically the process, the architecture review process. I think the council's entitled to feedback from us. They changed these findings 2 years ago. How has it been working? I think we all feel it's been relatively positive, but just to put that out there to them is a good thing. Is there anything else on the process of architecture review that the council should hear from us? For example, we mentioned that the informal review process was useful. I don't know if that's council or staff, but is there anything the council would want to hear about the ARB process? For example, several times they've, say 429 University in the Mercedes building, I wouldn't say overruled us, but they tie our hands by approving half the building and then say to us, fix it. Do we want to give them feedback on that?
And we shouldn't discuss the Mercedes because it's still out there. It's not approved yet.
Okay, so, and does anybody else have any, I think the concept of the review process, I think, needs to be in our meeting, even if only quickly. Is there anything else we can add to that aside from the findings?
Yes, I'm a first-year member here, the only first-year member, and as a first-year member, I want to say that I thought the process has been working so damn well in certain areas here that we've discussed, and I can't name the project, I guess, but
It's under
but-
review, you can't talk about it.
Okay, Peter will stop me right away. But, I just think those, when I feel very comfortable in going back home and saying after a day of spending a long, early hours here, that we've done very well in certain areas, maybe not on every project, of course, I don't feel that way, but I feel the consensus idea here, the way it happens with a group like this is quite incredible, and I'm happy to be a part of it and feel it's quite successful. And it ought to be, that ought to be expressed in some way here about how these findings are important to us, and when we all look at them, we try to make a project work better, and we think we've been successful, and that should be a bit of an introduction to the council meeting.
Are we all in agreement that the changed findings have been a beneficial thing to us?
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, it was about 20 of them before, David, and it was pretty tough to keep track of for anybody.
Yes.
This is only my second meeting back, but I think my 6th or 7th year, and I do want to acknowledge that less is more, and the staff has been instrumental, and I think we should acknowledge that definitely when we talk about the process. Yeah.
Is there anything else about the review process we want to bring to council's attention?
I can't think of anything. Yeah.
So then what I've heard is that we'd like to discuss affordable housing design standards, perhaps trees and, I can't use the word parking maybe, but San Antonio design standards, curb management, and the ARB process.
I want to ask a question, though, at this point. Where is there a commercial building that we have been working on that's part of this?
I'm sorry.
Is there any specifically about commercial buildings that we have been dealing with at all here?
Relating to the 5 topics I just mentioned?
Yes. This place, when we're talking about housing as a topic, why you're not talking about commercial buildings?
What about commercial buildings?
Been very successfully reviewed and a part of a main piece of our work.
I'm sorry, David, I'm not understanding what you're driving towards, though. We want to discuss with council commercial buildings in what regard?
Talking, is there a mention of housing? Once again, we had housing that you were bringing up, an issue of housing specifically.
Yes, so we'd like to discuss the potential need for some design standards for affordable housing and demonstrate how our review of other projects with discretionary review has made a benefit. That's something.
If I may, to Grace's point, do we want to focus on affordable or just housing in general? I mean, I think the city as a whole is trying to encourage housing in general.
I would say housing in general.
Housing in general, fine. What I'd like to do then is take a break quickly,
Yeah, okay.
change our agenda to let the
Back to
subcommittee
what I'm
do its
trying to
work,
say.
come back, and the objective will be to pick a member to help with each one of these, to come up, see if we can collectively come up with some examples of design standards, and then sort of set how we're going to go about getting this all together, if everybody's agreed with that. Can you wait a second afterwards? Yeah. Okay, so let's adjourn for a minute, let the subcommittee do their work. So we'll take 10 minutes, 15? Yeah. We're going to pick up on agenda item number 3. So we were just discussing our list of topics, and I'd like to review that list once more and see if we are feeling good about it. As we've had the break, I've been thinking we still have too many things here, and it's not full, not
Right,
clear
and
enough.
the council may want to add to that.
Yes, and it is worth thinking that we are now going to be presenting this informally to council in advance. What do they want to see? And the planning director too, perhaps. So with that in mind, I think that the concept of some sort of housing design standards, as Osma had been discussing, is important. I think that the curb management issue is something we can specifically address that might work. And maybe, Alex, you can make an argument about the way trees impact underground parking. I think and then I insist that we just put the ARB process out there as a very quick statement of how it's working. But the design standards for San Antonio probably just more than we can fit in an hour. Any sense on that?
It depends on how this, on how this PowerPoint is going to get presented, because I think we can touch on even more than these things if it's like a quick, this is one of our observations, this is another one of our observations, this is a third of our observations, and then we conclude. Then we can kind of, like, for example, the San Antonio Design Guidelines, obviously we don't have a solution for that at all yet, but we can just mention that San Antonio is changing, and we might want to talk about what we want that to look like in the
So
future.
just a quick mention of it then. I'm just more and more leery that we have an hour with 7 council members who all like to speak, and so we can get lost really quickly. And the more we can really concretely focus on something and get good examples of it.
I agree with Osma's point of view that if you can weave the design, the IRB, that
The ARB
process in with specific projects somehow, make that the beginning. I would rather put that first than any of the other topics that you're discussing here. It's the most important one in my mind to really show how the process is working, how we work as a team, and I think it's a highlight of, and it will be very positive.
Yeah, that'll be the feel-good moment when we can explain what we do. We all sort of enjoy it, and we have made a difference. It's quite concrete, and we can show that. This is our chance, though, to tell them about things that need to be fixed as well. And I think the more we can be concrete about that. Oh, yes, I'm sorry about that. Can we open the meeting to testimony from a member of the public, if you'd like to say something? Oh, we didn't see that.
A card.
No, it was much later, probably half an hour ahead.
Okay, so whoever's watching, we have a request from Mary Sylvester, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. And I'm sorry to be so formal, but you will have 3 minutes. If you could state and spell your name for the record, please.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Mary Sylvester. That's Sylvester, and I'm a 41-year resident of Palo Alto. And I just have a few general comments to make about the study session topics. My first comment, though, is to thank you all for your service and to do this publicly, this thinking through process of what you're going to discuss with council. I think it's vitally important. And I want to thank staff as well, to Ms. Gerhardt and Ms. French. They're doing a lot of the hard work behind the scenes, and they get a lot of grief from the public, myself being one at different times. So thank you. And I also think it's important to keep this study session in mind as to its goals. It's to educate the council, I believe, but also the public. I've been to 4 study sessions over the last 3 years, and I have found them fascinating, both for the degree of dedication that the commissioners show, but again, how they conceive of their mission, and then the interplay between the commissioners and the council. And sometimes topics have gotten heated, particularly with the PTC and the council. I was at one meeting where Asher Waldfogel, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind, he handled it beautifully, and Greg Scharf got into a rather heated discussion. But again, it gave the public a sense of their thinking. Ooh. Okay, and I want to comment, I want to thank Ms. French for her framing. 1 hour is not long. And I think it's very important that you both have the feel-good moments as well as the challenges facing the community and your recommendations. Ms. Lee's comment about coordination and how you work with the PTC, for instance, the public wants that transparency. How does coordination go on between urban forestry, PTC, ARB, HRB? And that's a process issue, but it also goes to a larger mission, I believe, of the city. That was a vital part of the planning meeting for the new council this year, where they were talking about transparency being integrated into every goal they adopt for this new year. And one of the key goals was sustainability and climate change. So Commissioner Thompson's comments about trees, scale, materials fit in beautifully to the sustainability and green goals the council adopted in 2019 for the next year. Along with that, scale, materials, aesthetics, maybe it went off to the side, but I think that's where your refined eye comes in. I caution you about endorsing underground garages, and I'm prejudiced. I'm a neighbor of Castellea School that has one planned, but we know the council this year rejected the downtown underground garage for a number of reasons, but there is an impact on groundwater. There's foundational impacts on neighbors. Commissioner Liu, I loved your comments on mobility. We have huge demographic changes. I'm turning 65 within a month. I feel the changes in the walkability and livability of the city. And lastly, the idea of a case study that integrates your thinking and that feel-good moment such as Wilton Court. It's interesting that for the public to hear not only your thinking, your goals, but how the project was improved. Because many of us, if you're not involved with the actual project, you don't know a lot about affordable housing and the ARB process. And so I think it's an interesting moment to integrate both affordable housing issues generally, and again, you have just a few minutes, but make mention of it, and then how the ARB process has made for a better project for the community. So thank you very much. It's been a fascinating opportunity to observe your thinking.
Thank you very much for your comments. This was well thought through. Okay, gang. Affordable housing design standards. Seems to me the Wilton Court project is the poster child we want to talk about. Ozma, you've been vocal about it. Do you want to take on working? You have to work with staff to collect images to do a before and after and show the effective design review.
Sure.
Does that sound, are we in support of that idea? Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, and I wouldn't limit it to Wilton Court.
Let's think of some other projects and what other,
And I think there are a couple issues I think we want to just touch on. So one is, so like with affordable housing projects, it's likely that we're not going to get ground floor retail on them. And so like on Wilton Court, there are ground floor communal uses, right? But say like on 801 Alma is ground floor residential, which is like, at least in my mind, is like not desirable to have like your bedroom window on the sidewalk.
certainly not a
So
grade, yeah.
I just want to just bring up, issues like just general issues like that where the board has struggled in the past. Like 801 Alma, the children's playground was put on the shady side of the building. There was a reason for that, but it was not desirable generally. Like you normally would put that in the sun. So.
Something Osma might have been involved in. How about the one in the corner of Page Mill and El Camino? It's a large housing building.
That one's like workforce housing. It's a little different than, it's a different overlay. That was like public facilities with workforce housing overlay. So that's a little different than affordable, but we can put them together. But I just want to make sure that we understand there's a distinction.
Well, just to give Osma some direction as to which projects we think you might want to be looking at.
Maybe I can work with Alex on this. We can like kind of, is
Well,
it possible for us to tag team?
Whatever you folks want to do. If the two of you want to tackle this together. I mean, I'm thinking that we have too much stuff here. And I want to get us to focus.
I agree.
So the more we can just say, let's just look at this housing issue and not try to stretch our boundaries. So if Alex and Osma together want to come up, what I envision is that each part of the board will work on part of this and perhaps present a series of PowerPoint slides or some other structure that we can then integrate into one thing that staff can help us be ready to present at the meeting. And then each board member will speak regarding this topic that they've prepared.
Maybe
I'm
we could
happy to help as much as I can. For that week in December, we've got like ARB. I also have Ventura that same week and the council and our joint council meeting. So I may not be able to help that much, but I will
You should
do
explain
as much as I can.
You should explain that to your partner, not to me.
Yes.
I'm going to
I should-
expect the two of you to come through on what we've agreed.
Yes.
I was going to suggest that we also loop in the trees thing because it's sort of related.
Focus,
Yeah,
focus, Osma. It's really important. You have 7 council members in one room, just it's very hard to get things done.
I think that, to me, the affordable housing issue is sort of I'm thinking that it's on their mind, and I think it's in the community's mind, and I think the tree thing could be pushed back to another meeting.
You don't think it could just be like
We can flash-
guidelines where we're just like, hey, by the way.
I think it's fine to highlight it as an issue, but I'm thinking like not dwelling on it.
Yeah, no, not about dwelling.
If you really want to discuss something, then I think that it should be the housing.
Yeah, there could be mentions, topics, issues coming up or something like that ought for consideration. One sentence long kind of comment about some other pieces that we're concerned about without making it a topic.
Well, what I would like to myself just bring to the board, to council's attention, the ARB process, make the statement that we think the findings are working. I'd like to make a statement that the ARB awards are coming up and it's been positively received in the past and we start planning to do that. It doesn't have to be a lot. In that same statement, I can also make a statement about the San Antonio design standards. There's going to be a need for that in the future. Not do any more than that, no discussion whatsoever, if we feel that we want to have it mentioned someplace. but I don't want that to become a big show. Alternatively, we could make the ARB process about demonstrating our process and show 1 or 2 design projects with a couple of slides showing the improvement. And that's a feel-good kind of thing. Everybody likes to see it. So if there's a sense that we should be doing that, that's the place to do it.
Can I, on San Antonio, I think maybe, I think there are a couple things that we should maybe consider enlarging
Okay?
that, and mostly because we have, the council's sort of gone back and forth over the years. Like for a while, they didn't want to put housing there, and then they decided that they do want to put housing there. It's commercially zoned. The condominium neighbors want, they have their own opinion about wanting residential. So I think maybe it's not just design, but I think it's actually a planning. It seems to me it's a planning issue, and then we have projects that, like the affordable housing project is trying to put in pedestrian-friendly things, but it's actually the zoning is automobile-based. So I think I would just mention that and not make it a huge discussion point, just say it's out there.
The more
there are big issues.
The more I think about it, the less I think there's a value in just saying it's out there. I mean, it just dilutes the message of, if we want to deal with this affordable housing design stuff, that's a real legitimate, strong thing that we can make a good case for, and we can really get behind it. We could easily spend an hour talking about that. And I think we should focus as much as we can on what we think is really important. San Antonio is an enormous planning issue, and it's something the city's been wrestling with, and I don't know that there's too many design issues. I mean, that hotel is going to be a shining design example of what happens with the 2.0 FAR hotel on that street. But we could go through the design cases and showed how we stepped it back and we made it better. I'm not sure it's good enough, and I'm not sure how the policymakers in the city want to let it reflect on San Antonio Road, but is now when we want to really be bringing that up.
We can, what we can do is, because we have one, there is one affordable housing project on San Antonio Road, right? And we shouldn't discuss it because it's out there. But we could just include that in the affordable housing. Like, I would maybe just put it in there, saying that in addition to like affordable housing on El Camino, that we actually have them. We have one on San Antonio Road as well.
Absolutely.
Right? And just fold it in as that San Antonio is part of our El Camino. Like, we lump it in together with El Camino and affordable housing and not have it as a separate topic.
I think if you could fold that in with any discussion of the housing design standards, that would be successful. But I'm becoming of the opinion that the subject of trees and parking and how they're related is just not going to work, and the San Antonio design standards on its own is just too much. But I'd still like to see David give us some examples of where better curbside management on designs can make a difference. I think that's a shortcoming that a lot of projects have that's very solvable, and it's very current. Is there consensus on that? To let that be the second subject?
I don't know how much there is to talk about that.
I'm thinking that so in addition to like those like transportation networking companies, that we have had issues with the like buses and the hotel projects. So there are like community concerns about the bus, like.
So maybe we're just adding our voice to something everybody's starting to see, but that's appropriate.
Right.
But it seems to me it's something we can concretely point out that we've observed.
I think we can point it out. I think the council understands that there's a transportation sort of revolution coming. I think they understand that. I think we can point out that it's impacting architecture projects.
You think it's superfluous? Should we just not spend our time on it?
I think you can mention it.
I think it's fine to mention, yeah.
David, are you okay taking that on to find some examples? Do we want to give him some advice on where to go with it then?
Well, we discussed Cambridge Avenue, which was one of those areas where where Peter in particular was concerned about the issue of deliveries and curbside. And yes, I see the problem kind of citywide with the trucks that pull up and delivery trucks, UPS kind of trucks. And even in the neighborhoods, how mail delivery works with parking issues and street. In particular, I think that there are a number of narrow streets that have problems that way, and that, so I think a study of it, transportation study, is important.
Can we suggest some projects that, I think it was 400 Cambridge, do I remember the number right?
Cambridge, definitely.
Was that large office building?
Yeah.
Steve Pierce designed, or his
I
project.
think, to add to this, I think that maybe the council isn't that aware of some of these issues, and pointing it out is important.
That's the purpose of this, as I see it.
Yeah, I mean,
is to point
I
out
just
to
think
council.
that they're not aware.
What other projects where the,
It's come up, well, it's come up a lot on quite a number of projects, but as I mentioned before, the zoning code has been,
how about,
it's already been updated. And then I think maybe on curbside management, I think you do want to highlight that it's like changing, and it's like changing rapidly. So say, for example, like we have like Amazon, and then also the post office is delivering Amazon packages, and it's happening, and they do it, it's 7 days a week, all hours of the day
yeah,
and
you
night.
can't control it. How about
So-
Hotel Parmani? Didn't they actually have a fairly successful way to direct traffic, visitors, guests off the street into, if I remember right, we worked with them to get around off Hanson Avenue. They had a pretty good-sized turnaround area that I thought worked pretty well. But that was through our encouragement, not through the code. Am I remembering
They have
that
a
correct?
they have a portico share, and I think there's a way of, people are saying that you can have a designated, you can designate a drop-off point for those companies.
Oh, they're even doing that down in Los Angeles now at the airport, I've seen. Jody and Amy, do you have any ideas of what we might do if this topic is to go through?
So I think Hotel Parmani is a good one. I mean, that one's been already through the process. I mean, we have another hotel that we're working on, but that one's still pending on El Camino. Yeah, others aren't coming to mind, but I can certainly, look further into this. And also too, I mean, don't hesitate to ask us. We should have, the initial plan sets and the final plan sets for all of these projects. So just let us know, what addresses you're looking at.
Yeah.
So how about, just to kind of move this along a little bit, maybe we just take a stab at the slides that, we're kind of getting assigned, and then, I know we're not meeting on the 21st, but maybe we can, I don't know, are we allowed to share that via email to each other? How can we coordinate?
Yeah.
What's the protocol here?
It's not a project, that's the issue. You don't want to have like a private meeting about it, deciding on a project, but this is just a,
We're making a PowerPoint.
yeah.
So what's the should we all send our slides to Amy or something? Or should we all send our slides to one of us, Jody, and then she'll compile kind of thing?
I think you still want to do it through staff, because that way there's a record of it, so that if a member of the public wants to see it, that there's a way for staff to share it. If we send it privately, there's no way for the public to see it.
Okay, so how about we just all send our slides to Jody, and then maybe we get a chance to review it. I don't know if we can set up some kind of protocol where we can mark up ideas, and then have a incorporation, having a.
Let me come back to that in 1 second, Ozma, because I'm trying to list projects first, and I want to do one more thing, and then we can get into the process more. We'll be very quick, I promise you.
Okay.
But if we wanted to look at the ARB process itself and pick one or two projects where we reviewed and made changes and felt it was successful, what would we recommend? Which projects do we think that we can feel good about the changes in the design and that we have good imagery?
Cambridge, for one, Cambridge Avenue.
400 Cambridge is one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
We're
know
gonna
that
talk
they
about-
made that many changes, though, David, from that design. That
No,
was.
they did.
You did.
They did?
Yeah, they
Yeah,
did.
before
Dramatic
me.
from the
pretty
first,
dramatic.
from the
First
first
one,
to the
from the
last, it
first
was
to the
very
last,
dramatic,
yeah.
actually.
Okay.
And, certainly curb
Give
management.
me two
committee.
others that we have something to choose from.
Well, I think the affordable housing one that we talked about, Wilton Court,
Wilton
is a
Court
good
is a good
example.
one, okay.
Should we just pick one
Okay,
more?
so
Or
Alex,
just keep two?
Alex, you have to come up with one now.
I made a list of projects, but I don't have it in front of me at the moment.
I can send you, would it help to get a list of past projects? And how far back?
I mean, the best way to do this would be to not have a separate discussion of the ARB process, but to have that be integrated into the discussion about the things we're really trying to say. So on Wilton Court, we can use that as an example of not just the ARB process, but where we think design standards are important. In 400 Cambridge, we can, again, use it as an example of the design process, but also this need for curb management better. So if we can do it that way, that's even better. So if we're all agreed that those two projects are ones that we want to focus on, I'm happy we're focused.
This is an hour, right? We have an hour,
Well,
and we're going to
minus-
make a presentation first, and then there's going to be discussion, and the council
That's how I
people will...
envision it. But I
Okay.
think we have like 5 minutes of presentation.
Yeah, that's not
It's got to be
much.
quick.
So I think we're probably good then. We got some.
So then let me suggest that I would like to be, or one person needs to be the point person on the ARB to assemble, the way we did the letter sort of, to assemble everything into one presentation, and then we can all collectively keep reviewing it. Alex's point about going through staff by email was important. But I think if we just copy staff and ourselves, we can get that together. And then Jody can formally say, here's the draft, so it's going through the staff again. Does that make sense?
Okay, so just to clarify, so we would work on our individual slides and then send that to one person and CC Jody?
Yes.
And then give ourselves like a few days to review it and incorporate any changes. And then when we feel comfortable, we can publish that for public review.
I don't think we need to publish for review. It'll go in the agenda of the meeting. Whenever that's noticed, the agenda packet will have the
So,
presentation in it probably.
so Jody, when do we have to be done with that?
Yeah, because the council has a 2-week, there's a 2-week lead time for council meeting packets. So, yeah, so it's not far
So
off.
it's like end of next week?
Sorry, I'm looking that up, just a second.
Calendar up here and look at the schedule for this.
Because this is for December 2nd, presentations, when staff is doing presentations, they're due 11/28, because those are reviewed by the director. I don't know that, but if we can do 11/28, that would be great.
So today's the 7th. So in 2 weeks, in 1 to 3 weeks' time, we have to have this completed. So why don't we say in 1 week's time, Ozma and Alex will put together 10 slides and whatever verbiage supports this for about 3 minutes of presentation. Does that seem about right? It's not a lot, but you want to really focus and narrow it down. Staff can help you dig up records, or I have a pile of, I'm sure I have those drawings, but that's available pretty readily. And we've agreed that Wilton Court is the example we're focusing on, unless you come up with something better. David, same thing to you regarding 400 Cambridge and curb management. Grace had to leave, but she offered to help wherever we thought best. Would you like her to partner with you on that, or is that just more trouble than it's worth? In 1 week's time, you can barely get anything together.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think Grace is limited time, frankly. She's pretty busy.
So maybe we should switch it around then and ask Grace to just address the issue of how our findings have been successful. She's one of us with experience of past findings, and so she can, with some legitimacy, just, well, I guess that's not true though, because she hasn't worked with the ones we have now.
Maybe you can work with her on that.
So I
You
can,
know, what impressed me today, first time I've heard Grace talk, is her generality. She's looking at things in a very broad picture, and her language is very, very good for that. I would love to have her sum up in some way.
okay, so let's get her to do that. So, okay, David, you're going to prepare another maximum of 10 slides and 3 minutes worth of verbiage for the issue of curb management and
Yeah,
400
if I could
Cambridge.
weave it in, as I think Ozma suggested, weave it into Cambridge and,
Yeah.
and just say the curb management, and this is a specific problem that we see more generally in the city.
And maybe we say that on these two project examples, we're also, as you're discussing it, you mentioned the process of architecture review and how the changes occurred in the project as you're presenting it, so we don't do that separately. We supportive of that?
Yeah.
Okay, so 1 week from now, what I suggest is that you email to me and to Jody. What I'll do is try to put it all together or give feedback, and what we'd like, the idea would be after a week, we can prepare a preliminary draft of the whole thing, then everybody can comment on it once more. Additionally, we may have additional feedback from the council this afternoon, so we'll keep everybody abreast.
Are we all comfortable using PowerPoint? Or should we use like PDFs? Like, should we send PDFs or Word files? I'm just wanting to clarify medium.
I've had problems in the past using different versions of PowerPoint with the city, like doing my own computer and then coming to the cities, and it wasn't 100% compatible. I don't know what the problem was, but there were different versions.
Well, hopefully, the last week is to sort
Yeah,
that out.
but the other option is just collecting the images and letting. No staff, you guys don't have manpower. Should we make the entire presentation, like
So-
graphics on top of the photos?
Yeah, I mean, I've got Office 365. That's the version of PowerPoint that I have. So if that's what others have, or usually if you have a little bit older than that, it should be okay. So I think PowerPoint would be fine. And even if you gave me PDFs, I can move it to PowerPoint. So that's fine.
Let me suggest that send in PDFs, image files of any kind, text of any kind. I'll put together the PowerPoint slides for the start, so we have a consistent format and graphics, and then we can all comment and change it as we like. But the initial feedback within a week is just the data, the content. After that, it'll be a PDF and a PowerPoint file that we're circulating. We edit that directly. Are we all agreed with that?
But if we wanted to send you PowerPoint, we could, if that's like the
Sure,
way we're collecting.
the idea is
Okay.
whatever's easiest for you.
All right.
But we're focusing on content the first week. The second week is editing and review. Third week will be just to make sure we have it all together. Any other comments, Jody? Have we covered this to death?
There was the parking and the trees. Is that just going to be maybe woven into the housing discussion?
I think we're going to try not to discuss it.
No, I think we're going to leave it
Put it in
in.
the housing.
Yeah. Just touch on it briefly.
Touch on it briefly.
And then did you have a time limit for your ARB process sort of discussion that you were going to have? I've got 3 minutes for housing, 3 minutes for curb management.
I'm envisioning the ARB making a presentation of less than 10 minutes in total time with us talking. After that, it's up to the council how they want to run this, I think. We might find more this afternoon. But I'd like us to be succinct, focused, prepared.
Do I assume, Peter, you're going to do an intro to the whole thing to begin with? How's that going to work?
I imagine so, but we'll find out today how the mayor wants to run the meeting. It's for them to call.
So the first week of December, we have 2 meetings. We have the one on the 2nd and the one on the 5th. Okay.
So,
I mean, I would think that, I would think you should start off then that how we use the findings, some description of that. I'm not so sure they all understand exactly how we proceed with our meetings.
I was thinking to wrap up with that instead.
Oh, yeah? I think it's better to start with
Think
it.
better to start with that?
Yeah.
Maybe once you get all the
As I
content.
put it together, we'll realize when we all edit it together that it's really important that it's something we can all support so that we're not feeling compelled to say things outside of our presentation when we're talking to them. With that, agenda item number 3 is finished. We now have to move on to minutes of October 3rd, 2019.
And I did just want to note for the record that Board Member Lee was excused at 10:03 this morning.
That's correct. Thank you. So, assuming everybody has reviewed and agreed with these minutes, I'll be looking for a motion to approve.
I just have one correction. It's on packet page 20. I was speaking, and there's just one word which is in the minutes is rigorous, and I said vigorous. That's what I intended to say. But I will make a motion that we approve the minutes as corrected if there aren't any other corrections.
Well, if you're into that level of detail, Alex, on page...
Now that you're mentioning words, Alex, I'd have to go back into our
Here it is.
letter,
On page 34, our friend Alex, the landscape architect, is bringing up, I think, a corsus as an oak tree, not a cercis. It's halfway down, the transcriber just didn't understand what you're referring to on 2 trees.
Where is
So
that?
page 34, in the middle of the paragraph where Alex is talking about trees, it says, I think there are 2 T1 trees. One is a cercis and one is a soltis. And,
No, I think that's
can you enlighten us what you were really referring to?
Oh, it is a phonetic spelling there.
Okay, if you're going to be that picayune.
So what are the tree
Then I want to go
names?
back
or-
to packet page 13.
Just one second, David. So,
Soltis.
And on page 13, if you look down, there's a word, the TDMs require regular and complaint-based monitoring rather than compliant.
But that's not in the minutes, David.
I know it's not.
Okay, so hold on, David, please, hold on. So,
Okay, you're correct. I think the cercis is correct, and the soltis is, I think, probably, I should double check. There's probably a CELTUS or celtis. I have to look at the tree name. But yes, the phonetic one is not correct.
so
But it's not, I was not saying it was an oak tree, a quercus.
that's what I assumed it was.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so maybe
No,
it's good.
but the oak tree comment I had was about an existing tree. And that was different than this the tree T1 on the lands.
Okay, so with those
On the
2
landscaping plans.
corrections from Board Member Liu and the motion from Board Member Liu to approve, do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, then it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? The motion carries 4-0, and that's the end of that item. Now, Board Member Hirsch, you were pointing out a typographic or spelling mistake on a previous agenda item,
Packet page 13, I think that,
and that's on the item we just finished, right?
I know.
So let's
Sorry to
take
go
that
back.
offline between you and
Okay,
staff,
if you
okay?
would like.
I don't think there's any point to going back to that.
Okay, that's fine.
I think then that we finished the subcommittee, so we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
North Ventura Cat.
Offline.
I'm sorry, we are not adjourned. We are not adjourned. So sorry, I apologize, Alex. Yes, we have
Okay,
the report from the Ventura meeting.
Yes, so there was a meeting on October 29th. The consultants are not back on the project yet, but we did have a meeting, and we did hear from a new consultant on the scope of work that they're going to do for naturalizing the creek in the area. And then the committee did work on developing 3 alternative schemes, which will be developed later. And the next meeting is tentatively scheduled for December 5th.
Are those schemes available to the public yet, or?
No,
Just
so the
working on it.
consultants have not started working on the alternates. They're just starting to develop. They haven't been working on the project, but they are going to start developing 3 alternatives. So,
Well, Alex and I have something to discuss, some thoughts that I had on going forward on the planning. If I come up with thoughts, I think it's important that Alex take a look at it. He's our representative on this project, and so I'm not intending to interfere with the formal way in which we're presenting ideas, except that through Alex. So I sent him a number of ideas that I'm working on.
Well, I would think what's appropriate is that Alex is the representative of the ARB on this committee, and so he's entitled and should be listening to comments the ARB has to make, and from that form an opinion of how he represents what we're thinking. So if you have comments to make, it would be wise of you to share them with Alex, either now or if it's complex or detailed, somehow in advance of a meeting, so we can all see it in writing. But
So are you saying I should share them with the other board members here first?
not necessarily first, but you should make known what you'd like the boards to be represented with Alex, and I think the other board members would like to know what it is, because we want ultimately Alex to be representing a majority of the opinion of the board.
Excellent, okay.
Is that correct?
yes, and then I think my understanding is with the city planning staff is that that the North Ventura plan will come to the board for some comments on certain scope of the project, but maybe not the entire scope. It would be the parts of the project that the board would have purview over. So so the board will have an opportunity to comment on it.
So do you think it's appropriate or useful, Alex, for David, for example, to offer suggestions or comments regarding the way the process is going or what the content is now, or is it best to give that to you in writing separately? What do you think is useful?
Okay. Well, I think he already has, and it's fine. And I think a little bit of it is outside of the scope of the planning process that the council has given us, but that's fine.
So David, you've offered suggestions to Alex, and those have been offline of the board, just between the two of you.
Just between the two of us.
Yeah, so I suppose,
But I'd be prepared to share it with everybody if Alex thinks it's reasonable.
Yeah, but so like David, I mean, just because as an example, like I mean, you were proposing like bicycle routes between Ventura and Barron Park, and that's outside of the scope of the project boundaries that the council has given us. So like I think it's important, but it's not like we have any. We don't necessarily have any say over that, unless it's within the project boundaries. So.
In fact, the entire comments were probably outside the scope, because I'm saying influences that are outside the scope are influential on a particular project that's been bounded and presented to the group to study. And if you don't look at the elements that affect it from the perimeter, the fact that Stanford Park is there, and all of the all of the office development around it is impacting this area as well. And in fact is kind of invading it in some ways right at this moment, you know. The park housing was a mix of retail and of offices and residential. Seems to me to be an influence of what is affecting the project. So, you know, Alex, if you agree that it's okay to do so, I'd like to share it with the rest of the board, these thoughts. And let us as a group discuss it separately.
What I'd like to do is leave Board Member Liu in charge of how we discuss this topic, in the sense that over the course of this committee being formed and functioning, we should be giving Board Member Liu our comments and thoughts as we see appropriate. Each time we discuss this at a meeting, when it's been agendized like this, it's up to Alex to decide which things he thinks he should formalize within the whole board. For example, Board Member Hirsch brought up this issue, which I think is important. I'd like to make you aware of what I'm thinking. If he doesn't feel it's germane or issue or relative to his issue, I would rather not have us second guess that judgment right now, but rather leave it to Board Member Liu to spearhead our representation on this other committee. And then, I don't know, I think that's just the most practical way to bring that up. Alex, obviously David has some opinions you should be sharing with us, but I'll leave that to your judgment.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one, because I think the things that David brings up are important. They're planning issues. But again, it goes back to the ARB's purview and our scope, and that we actually have a planning commission and city council that do address issues that he's brought up. It's not necessarily our place. We can acknowledge them. But I don't know. I think we just. Can I just generally? I mean, I think I understand that the city and the residents really love to study and plan everything, and we have huge, enormous planning documents for some of the areas in Palo Alto. And I think that really on the Ventura, it really needs to, we really just need to focus on the task that the council has given us. It's difficult enough just to address the issues that the council wants us to do, which is housing, and a connected street grid, and historic preservation, and then to go beyond the scope of that and venture into like the relationship of the research park and Barron Park and stuff. It just seems to me like we're just going to really go too far out there.
Okay, Alex, if you could be sure as a courtesy to the members of the board to bring forth to everybody opinions like what David is doing, even if you feel that that's not appropriate to discuss, which is what you've just explained right now, as we go forward. So David, it's important that you're listened to and Alex is thinking about what you have. It's important that we as a board respect Alex's judgment of what, he's the one at the meeting. He knows what that meeting is trying to accomplish, and we don't want to tie his hands or second guess what's going on. But Alex, if you could just acknowledge these things to the board when we discuss them, so that David feels his being heard on this issue. And then also, if other members of the board feel that what David is saying is something we should discuss more carefully, then we can bring it up at that time. Is that something we can all work with?
I can work with it. I'm wondering, are you saying that Alex should share what I've sent to him to?
Yes, basically, Alex is the one who will bring back comments
fine.
from everybody at these
Yes.
presentations every meeting.
Okay.
So we should make whatever comments we have to Alex. and
Which
then-
I did.
Which you did. And then Alex will bring up, as he sees fit, however it goes, what they are and what his reaction is, or how it's relating to this work. on the
Yeah, no, I
committee.
think it would be a good idea if Alex could make his comments on top of it and present it to the rest of you.
Yeah, so I think we're all in agreement on that. Great. With that, we have finished agenda item number 5. Number 6 we already did, so now are we adjourned? Alex, yes? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, very much.
Right.